Hello and welcome to the STEM and Research Podcast. Today we have Professor Nitin Gupta from Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, from the Department of Biological Sciences and Biological Engineering, or BSBE, who's here to share his story with science. So, would you like to introduce yourself for the audience?
Hi everyone, I'm Nitin and I'm a faculty member here in the BSB department. Um, my background is in computer science. I have an undergraduate degree in computer science. And then I did my PhD in bioinformatics and a postdoc in experimental neuroscience. And after that, I joined the department as a faculty member here. And my area of interest is computational and systems biology and neuroscience.
So, right now we're still in the middle of a pandemic, and one thing that's like immediately relevant is something that you have worked in the past. Like since daily cases have only been rising naturally, there might be more pressure on the healthcare systems in India, especially when it comes to like demand for PPEs or personal protective equipment. So, like, could you maybe right away talk about the PPE kit you were involved in developing?
Um, Yeah, so we started working on this right when the pandemic was starting in India in late March. And at that time, looking at the numbers in Italy and Spain, it seemed like the numbers were just going through the roof, and the healthcare systems were getting out of capacity, and people had nothing, no protection, and nothing. So although the numbers in India were small, it seemed to us that the same thing might happen in India as well. It's just a matter of time, and because we did not have the sufficient manufacturing capacity for PPEs, we thought that there is a need for finding low cost alternatives that can be quickly scaled up. And one thing we thought that is readily available is this polyethylene material with which normal carry bags are made. So we felt that if we can mold it somehow in the shape of PPE in a way that can be done very quickly, then that might help people if there is ever a crisis here. So we worked with a local factory in Kanpur. They brought us, so they make these plastic packaging films for other industry. So they bought some samples here, and then we played with it for 15, 20 days and came up with a design that can be very quickly made, very efficiently, at the cost of like at 1/10 of the standard cost of PPEs. And the design has worked reasonably well, and we have made it open source now, so anyone can use it. It's available on our website pipeskit.org, and 3-4 companies in India have started using it, and they are making the design and supplying the PPE kits to people. But thankfully, the crisis that we imagined in the beginning, that the health system will get completely overwhelmed and there would be lakhs or crores of cases suddenly, it didn't rise so rapidly. The numbers are rising, and maybe things will become bad perhaps, but it has not been as bad as we initially imagined. So the need has been also limited, I think.
So, how widely has it is it currently being used?
So I think about 75,000 kits have been made and supplied so far by these 3 or 4 manufacturers who are making it. Um, but the I guess the overall requirement is much larger. So, but one thing that has happened, because we got because the India country got some time, 3-4 months in between to prepare. So even the other kinds of standard PPEs have become available in the market now, and their production capacity has also been ramped up. So, so I guess something is available to people. People who are really short of funds can still use this, because the cost of the pipes kit is still quite low compared to others.
So could you like talk about how exactly it is relatively inexpensive?
So in terms of cost, so it's about 100 rupees per kit, 100 and 120 rupees, whereas the standard PP kits can cost somewhere between 500 to 1000 rupees. Uh, and how do we get it to be how we are able to make it so cheap is basically 2 things. One is the material itself is very inexpensive. Um, And secondly, the process of making it is also very simple. So you basically start with these polyethylene rolls. These are cylindrical tubes of polyethylene, and you press them. Um, so you already have like a two-layered material, and in that two-layered material, if you just make a few cuts and seals, which can be done again very quickly at one shot using dies, then you have like a gown-like thing that can be worn. So as opposed to standard PPEs that require stitching or ultrasonic welding that has to happen line by line on. So it takes more time and more infrastructure to do the standard PPEs, and this can be done with very cheap equipment, just using blades and heat sealing machines. So that brings the cost down.
Okay, so you said you open sourced it, right? Can you talk about why exactly did you open source it, and was there any reason not to, like in the big picture, if you're thinking about maximizing production or something like that?
Yeah, so well, maximizing production was the main reason, and we thought that instead of limiting, like the alternative that we could have taken was to have an agreement with a company that you will make it and then you can provide us or IIT Kanpur some royalty. But that would have limited the production to one company, and because that company would have the exclusive license, then they would have incentive to raise. I mean, they could have raised the cost also. So by open sourcing it now, any factory can make it, and because multiple factories can make it, that also puts pressure on them to not charge very high prices. So it both keeps the price low as well as increases the production, and also in a pandemic situation, you don't want to ship things very long distances because shipping chains or the supply chains are getting disrupted. So if different factories in different parts of the country can make it locally, then that would be the best.
So currently, is it just local or is it being used throughout?
So these four factories that are making it, one is in Kanpur, one is local, the one that we started working with, but the three others are in other different cities. So one is in Faridabad, one is in Mumbai, and one is in Pune.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, that's really nice to know. Maybe throughout the next section, we'll just talk about your background of what exactly made you the researcher you are today. So we are going to talk about the background journey in the next few questions. So as someone who has aced entrance examinations, what are your thoughts on the educational system in India relying so much on metrics like the exams or school grades? So what's your take on quantifying things?
Yeah, I mean, it's not ideal. I mean, any educational system should be open and should cater to the diversity of interests and diversity of aptitudes. Not everyone has to learn the same thing. Not everyone should have to become engineer or doctor.
Mhm.
There should be many more options. So I guess unfortunately what has happened in our country is that all of this is basically a side effect of lack of good quality colleges in the country. So the best colleges uh, tend to be or I mean a lot of good the number of good colleges other than IITs is very small, to put in other words. So if someone wants to go into any kind of technical work, then IITs are the best, and then there are some NITs and a few private institutions, but the numbers are small, and still in terms of the facilities and in terms of the type of instruction that is available, that choice remains limited. And because of that, I think this pressure is there that everyone wants to go to the same colleges, IITs in this case, or the same limited number of medical institutions. And when you have a country as large as India, with I don't know how many lakhs or crores of people are getting into that college, graduating from 12th class every year and getting ready to go to college, and you have only 20,000, 30,000 seats available, that causes this whole pressure. So it's unfortunate. So I think what is missing is the number of good colleges in the country. If that could be addressed, then all this pressure to go to certain colleges or focus on certain exams or metrics will go away.
So, when we're still on the note about talking about the differences between school and college, would you say that you enjoyed your formal education more in college than in school?
Um, well, uh, that's an interesting question. So I think I was pretty happy in my college, and I was also happy in my school. But I guess it also depends a lot on the what kind of college and what kind of school you go to.
True.
So I was in a small town, and my school was not particularly good, I would say. I mean, looking back, it was very restricted in terms of the facilities available. I mean, we had no sports ground. I mean, it was a tiny sports ground with 1,000 students in the school. So there were very limited things, and the quality of instruction was also rather limited. So, but as a kid, I still had fun in that time. But um, during college time, I came to IIT Kanpur, and certainly the campus here and the all the diversity of things that you can do in college was there. So I really had a good time. Um, yeah, so I guess overall, if I have to compare, then I would say my college time was more enjoyable than the school time.
So, since we're talking about school kids in general and school life in general, do you think for students who are still in school who are interested in pursuing research, what are some skills they could try and have right from the start?
Yes. So I guess one thing is to maintain that curiosity that every kid has to start with, and somewhere it gets lost during the process of school education or in the process of getting to college. Um, Asking questions of why does this thing work in this way, and why something happens, and being curious about multiple things, about nature, about human body, about how different gadgets that you use, how do they work. So I think everyone has that curiosity, and just maintaining that and asking questions, even if your school teachers cannot answer them. Now there are lots of other ways of getting answers through internet, or through, I guess there might be other Facebook groups, etc. that one could also join perhaps. So maintaining that interest and curiosity in science, and secondly, of course, you also need the skills. Just interest is not enough. You also need some basic core science and math skills to make progress. So learning your physics, chemistry, biology, math well is important also. I would put a little more emphasis on math. Um, Maybe I'm biased because I do work in a lot of quantitative research areas, but I think a lot of research areas are becoming data intensive, and when one is dealing with large amounts of data, it is helpful to have some mathematical abilities. But it need not be. I mean, one need not know very advanced, fancy maths. Even the basic school level math that is there in the standard textbooks, if one understand those things well, uh, that is enough in most cases.
So when you said like you should learn the physics, chemistry, math well, like can you tell people what exactly is your definition of learning something?
Um, I guess my definition would be what anyone would also say. I mean, you understand the concepts. So if you are uh, say, I mean, to take some example, say in physics, you are looking at friction and you're solving problems related to what what would be the acceleration of some mass, in the presence of friction, and in certain situations. So um, one should be able to sort of have an intuition about what is happening, what is I mean, not just learning the formulae and getting an answer, but having some intuition about what exactly is friction. That uh, the more heavy something is, the more friction also it will have. And if you have a inclined plane and you have some mass sitting on it, then the more steep it is, the more the less friction it will have, and why. So some intuition about these things as you are learning. So basically,
Sure. So, one thing you mentioned was doctors or engineers in the middle. I want to talk a little bit more about that. So, like, we have this sort of common myth in India that if someone wants to enter science or technology, they should like start with engineering or medicine, regardless of their interests. So it's almost as if you first become an engineer and then you decide what you want to become. So, like, is there any reason whatsoever that
yeah.
a career in a field like math or say bioinformatics should begin with engineering?
Right. So again, I think it is not the ideal situation. That's not how it should have been, but it is the way it is because if you want to do science in general, then the number of other places where you can get good quality education is limited. I mean, there are certainly some good colleges, some universities have good science colleges also where without becoming an engineer, one could still learn physics, chemistry, or other branches of science and become a good scientist eventually. But those opportunities are limited. So that's why, I mean, if the other places that have good science curriculum are IITs and NITs, and to go there, one has to become an engineer basically. So that's how that happens. But if I hope that going forward, if maybe perhaps more private colleges, good quality private colleges come up and they start providing good science education, then it would not be necessary for one to become an engineer to become a scientist.
So, you yourself entered like a computer science program for a BTech, right? Um, so, like, why exactly did you choose computer science? Were you always interested in it? Like, since you're doing biology now.
Mhm. No, I wouldn't say I was very passionate about computer science. I mean, to be honest, I just took computer science because partly because of the trend that computer science is considered a good branch, and I had a good rank, so I had the opportunity of taking any branch, and so that was part of the reason. I did have at my home there was a computer when I was growing up, so um, I liked working on the computer or playing on the computer more often. Um, so that was, I did not have anything against computer science, and I liked working with computers. So I thought, and the general trend was also liking computer science, so I went with it. But it was not a very informed or very considered decision, I would say. And perhaps that's maybe part of the reason that I meandered away from computer science eventually, because it was not my passion as such.
So, when you chose it, were you interested in biology? Like, were you always interested in biology?
Not really, actually. In fact, I did not have biology in my 11th and 12th class, so I only had physics, chemistry, math, and some language subjects. So till 10th class, I had studied biology, and I was okay. I mean, I liked it, but it was never. I certainly was more bent towards the engineering side. It just happened eventually that I got exposed to biology, and then I developed a liking for it later during my college. But when I entered college, I had never thought that I would go into biology actually.
Okay. So, I mean, ultimately, after you completed your BTech, you entered the field of biology. Like, with your interest, did you feel like not having an undergrad education in biology primarily did you feel like that made you fall behind in any way at all?
Mm. Um, well, actually, I did take some coursework in biology during my undergrad here. So there was this new BSB department had formed at the time, and there is an option of taking elective courses. So even though I was in the computer science department, I could take elective courses from biology, and that provided me some background and a lot of reading one can do oneself. So it's a, perhaps in biology where I think one could learn oneself to some extent. So I did some self reading myself.
Okay, but formally speaking, like you must have known other people who would have right from the start started educating themselves it within some kind of field that's related to biology. So, do you think compared to them, you felt like maybe they have some sort of head start on you?
Uh, I guess whether that happens will depend on what kind of work you want to do eventually in biology. So because biology itself is a very wide domain and there are many different types of research areas. So I was working in bioinformatics after my graduation, and that required more of a background in programming and data analysis. So for that, I think my background in computer science was useful. Uh, if I had a background in biology, it would have made it easier in some respects, but it would also have made my life harder in other respects. So I think the combination of computer science and some biology courses was suitable for that. But if someone wants to, there are people, I mean, someone could go even from computer science into more experimental biology. And if I were doing more core cell biology or molecular biology, then certainly I would have had some handicap there.
Mhm. So, as you mentioned, you were a student at IIT Kanpur, and again, as you already talked about it, you would say your experience was really good here. So, how does it feel to be back here as a professor now?
Well, if I had a choice, I would rather come back as a student again than as a professor. Uh, the life was certainly much more fun as a student, but um, I think it's it's nice to be back in the campus in some way. I'm sort of it feels familiar and it's easier to get it started, but I guess if I had gone to some other place, also I would have gotten used to it in a few months. So
Mhm.
that is not a major factor. And after that, now I've gotten used to being a professor, so I don't relate or I don't think about my student life too much now.
Mhm.
Mm.
So, kind of building upon that, as you mentioned before, when you started studying here, BSB was a very new department. So, do you think that the campus has changed a lot, both in culture and aesthetic? And more specifically, could you elaborate on the BSB side of it?
Um, well, the one way in which the campus has changed is in the size. So just the number of buildings and number of hostels and number of students, everything has doubled, I guess, since my time. But in terms of culture, it still feels the same to me. Students often, I mean, some people feel that things were better earlier and now some things have become worse. But I don't know. I think that feeling is always there. Things always seem messy at the present time, and past sometime is seen with a rosy lens. But I think I do remember when I was a student, then also there were various agitations and there were various complaints against the administration and so on. So that is always there. Um, But BSB certainly, I mean, there has been a major change because when I was there, then BSB was just a newly formed department, and even the building was not functional, and there were only 5 or 6 faculty members. Now we have a fully functional department with 20 faculty members, and the new building is coming up. So there is a lot of activity and also a lot of recognition of this department. I think at that time there was probably some hesitation among people that is IITs are supposed to be engineering colleges. Why is a bio department here? Now, sort of people appreciate the presence of a bio department in the engineering school.
Well, BSB is thriving right now on campus, and it would probably be incomplete without it, given the current situation. So that's nice.
So, I mean, you just mentioned that people thought, why is there a bio department in an engineering college? Like, but isn't biological engineering a proper engineering, would you say?
It is, yeah. So, but I guess now people are appreciating it as a proper engineering. But in the beginning, there were, I guess, there were hesitations about it. Can it be compared to real engineering, or is it like sort of more soft engineering? So, these debates are always there. Like mathematicians think that all the other branches are just applied sciences and they're not real sciences, and maths is a pure science. Physicists think the same thing about chemists, and chemists think the same thing about biologists. So, which science is more pure and more authentic? These views are always there, and they keep on changing.
Sure. So, you had a PhD in bioinformatics and systems biology, if I'm not wrong. I wanted to ask you about systems biology specifically because most people usually think of biology as a subject that's sort of reductionistic, like you break apart an organism or a system into its components and then you pick one of the components and then just study that in particular. So, can you talk about how systems biology is different from this common idea, and like what you would find interesting about this field?
Right. So I guess it's the answer is sort of already there in your question that in normal biology people break things down. So in the systems biology, the idea is to put things back together and see how they behave as a system. And the reason it is required is that if you had independent components, then perhaps that would be enough of just breaking things down and understanding the behavior of each component independently. And if they were independent, then you could predict how they will act as a group also. But when you have interacting components and something is exciting, like a protein is activating other protein, and the second protein is inhibiting the third protein, which is activating the first protein, then you have all sort of feedbacks, and what will be the final behavior of the system is very difficult to predict if you just know how individual components function. So there you need to look at the activity of the whole system, or to be able to model this activity of the whole system as a single whole rather than as a component. So, this is what people are realizing more and more in different domains of biology. So in terms of looking at the activity of genes or proteins, or in the case of my current focus, in the case of brain, how different neurons function together. So there are a lot of interactions between different neurons, and you want to see how the whole network behaves.
So, as a researcher, this seems like you're sort of bridging together different fields. Do you work with professional researchers in those other fields, or do you have to yourself, get acquainted with both the fields in extreme detail and then attempt to bridge them yourself?
So both things happen. In our lab also, we try to combine multiple fields. So there are some people in my lab who do experiments, and some people who do simulations, and experiments also of different kinds. But we also do collaborate with other labs. So we cannot do everything ourselves. That would limit us if we try to do everything ourselves. Or so we do collaborate with other researchers also who are working with different model systems, and they can provide data from those model systems. And things can be combined then.
So we were talking about systems biology before. That was one of your focuses on PhD. Talking about that a bit, you directly went for a PhD program after your bachelor's, which is not that conventional a trend in India. So maybe you could talk about it. And do you feel like this was sort of a jump or an unconventional trend for you?
Um, so, well, if you have a BTech, then one is eligible to apply for a PhD. And typically, if one has a BSc, then if you have a 3-year BSc, then a master's degree is also necessary. If you have a 4-year BS, then one can directly go for PhD. So I was eligible, and I was confident that I wanted to go for higher studies and did not want to go for a job. So I took that plunge right away. And looking back, I think it was the right decision for me. But if someone is not sure if the PhD is right thing for them, or if you're not, because it's a 5-year plus time commitment, and if one is not sure, then it's okay to do a job or to take a project position for a year and decide. Then.
So, on the topic of your PhD, you did your PhD from UCSD. How was your time different there from IIT Kanpur?
Well, I also had a really good time there. It was quite similar in some ways, that you would take classes and you would have your work, but I also had a lot of friends, and we would hang out in the evenings and have fun doing different things. Uh, how was it different? I guess as a PhD student, I had a little more independence because I was also getting a stipend, so uh, I had financial independence, and I could decide, I could choose what to do, and I was also staying in a rented apartment rather than living in a hostel. So it was a more independent life, but it was equally fun as a hostel life for me. Um, of course, in terms of work, the focus in during PhD was more on research, whereas here in the college, the focus was more on completing courses. So that is one main difference. You spend more time in the lab doing your research, which is so one is, I mean, you're not constantly chasing exams and finishing up courses, but thinking more long term about the research. So that is interesting in some ways.
So was that your first experience with the research?
Um, no, I had a little bit of research experience before going for PhD. So even while I was in IIT here, I did some projects, and I also took some internships. So after or during my third year, during my third year, I went for an internship at NCPS Bangalore. In the middle of my third year, and then after the end of my third year, I went for an internship outside. And during my IIT coursework, also I did several projects. So all of that gave me research experience, which was in fact, which was very essential for me before making the jump to PhD.
Okay, so since we're talking about research, how do you think the culture of research has shifted or is shifting in India?
If at all.
Yeah.
Um, I I would think that now there is slightly more awareness about it, and perhaps people are realizing that this is an option sooner. You guys are examples where you are actively thinking about research. Um, mm, but I guess in terms of people who are finishing college and going to research, that fraction seems to not have changed too much. Still, I think that is perhaps similar, at least in IIT, but maybe in other places, I don't know how the situation is, if that number is increasing or not.
So, when we're talking about being involved in research at a young age, what's your view on high school students being involved in some kind of research? Do you think such exposure could really change their trajectory, or do you think it's important? Also, do you think there is a lower age limit to it? Like, do you need to be a certain age to be involved in research?
No, I think there should not be an age limit, and there is no reason why someone young cannot get involved in research. And again, I think you guys are examples of it already. But um, I mean, research requires, depending on the project. So research is a very broad term, and the research project could be of many different kinds. Just observing the behavior of an animal under certain in two different conditions and comparing that can be a research project. And easily a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old can do that. I mean, just observing an ant and seeing what the ant is doing in two different conditions, and taking some notes in your notebook. So depending on the kind of project, people can get involved at early ages, and that can help in creating motivation, um, or at least mm, like making them more likely to go into science. So in that sense, I think early exposure to research can be very good. And how to do this and where to find the opportunities, I mean, the number of undergrad high school students is very high. So if every one of them started approaching the professors, then the professors would be sort of inundated, and they would not know who to take and who not to take. But if someone is serious and they are consistently making some effort, and then they approach someone, then I think something can be set up on a case-to-case basis.
That's good to hear.
Yes, that's really nice to hear. But that's also a really good point, because not everybody is going to get into research, but maybe it's necessary to get some people into it as well.
So, one of your primary research interests is insect olfaction. Can you talk about why you're interested in this particular topic?
So, so we use insect olfaction as a model system. So it's not that my interest is limited to that, but I mean, more generally, I'm interested in understanding the brain, how the brain functions, and how the brain makes decisions, and how the perceptions in the brain happen. And as part of that, we want to understand the functioning of neurons and neural circuits in general. And insect olfaction is the model system that we are focusing on. So different researchers in the field look at different systems, and all the information that we accumulate is sort of combined in the scientific literature, and we get an overall picture. But insect olfaction is a good model system in some ways, because there are a few things. So first of all, insects do show like a diversity of olfactory behavior. So olfaction is basically the sense of smell, and unlike humans, we are very much visual organisms. For us, vision plays a very dominant role in our lives, and other senses are of sort of somewhat lower importance. For insects, olfaction is very important. So a lot of their decisions in daily life on what we eat and where to go depends on their smelling sense. So, and other factors are that the size of the olfactory system, the number of neurons that it includes, is limited. So we have a possibility of mapping it in more detail, knowing exactly how many neurons are there, how they are connected to each other. And because it also, it has been a legacy that a lot of people have worked on this in the past. For last 100 years, people have been looking at the olfactory behaviors and olfactory circuits in various insects. So a lot of knowledge has accumulated, and it's easier to build on top of it. Um, and also it's easy. Why insects and not other organisms? Because it's easy to do manipulations on insects. So I mean, I could do 10 experiments on insects in the same amount of time as it would take me to do one experiment on mice. Uh, and it would take even much more time to do experiments on bigger organisms. So there are many practical advantages. There is lots of manipulations that one can do on insects. And at the same time, because all the organisms are related by evolution, so lot of mechanisms are well conserved across different animals. So even the how a single neuron functions, that is very similar between insects and mice and humans.
Okay, so I was just curious about one thing. You mentioned mapping the network. So were you referring to the connectome here? And like, are you guys like investing something with the bioinformatics intersection to work with that?
So connectome is a modern, like is a new term that people have started using, and it's often used. Well, it's used in various different ways. So when people are talking about human brain, and then when we talk about connectome, then we mean the large scale connections between different brain areas, and these are mapped using fMRI or related methods. Uh, in the case of insects or mice, when people talk of connectome, people are usually referring to electron microscopy image analysis, where you look at the different parts of the brain in a great amount of detail using electron microscopes. You can see even small components within a neuron. We are somewhere in between, so not as detailed as electron microscopy and not as broad as like the regions of human brain, but more like looking at the structures of individual neurons in the insect brain, and seeing like which neurons are there in different olfactory regions and how they are organized and connected to each other. So at a sort of a middle scale. So we typically deal with few hundreds to few thousands of neurons.
Okay, so if I'm not wrong, this sounds like it's related to systems biology. Like, would you say how exactly does your background in bioinformatics and systems biology link with this work?
Not directly. So this area is sometimes called systems neuroscience, and I guess at a very broad level, the concepts are similar. That when people talk of systems biology, people are usually referring to uh, systems of genes or proteins, where or systems within a cell, how things are interacting. In case of system neuroscience, we are talking of systems of neurons, how neurons are connected to each other and how they affect each other, and then how the overall behavior emerges from it. So the kind of interactions that could happen, excitatory or inhibitory interactions, and the kind of feedback loops that can form, there is a correspondence between those, but the entities are completely different.
That's great.
So another one of your main like interests is the computerized CBD project, which is Treadwell, if I'm not wrong. So maybe could you talk a bit about the motivation behind this area?
Yeah, so this is sort of a new area that I got into after I joined as a faculty member here. Before that, I had no experience in mental health. But after coming here, while I was setting up the experimental lab, we also realized that there is a need in the mental health space. There are a lot of people in India and everywhere, I guess, who have mental health problems, and because of various taboo and stigma, people do not get support. So we felt that if some solutions can be delivered through an automated program that people can access privately from their room without having to talk to anyone in person at any time, that would help. So that was the main motivation to try to make a psychotherapy program that can be done automatically.
So maybe could you just go a bit into depth about how it works? And if you don't mind, could you first explain what exactly is CBT for our viewers?
Sure. So CBT stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. It is one of the psychotherapy approaches. Psychotherapy is any kind of if you are having some mental health issues, then you could go to a counselor, and counselor can try to understand your issues, and then they will give you a therapy, which is basically some kind of training. Uh, and they will teach you some techniques that you can apply to analyze your own behavior and to change your own behavior. Um, so there are different approaches to this, but one of the most commonly used and most studied approaches is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, in which the main idea is that your behavior and your thoughts and your emotions, so these three things are very tightly related. So if you are having some, if you are feeling bad for a very long time, and I mean, that can happen to everyone, and that goes away after some time. But if that becomes starts affecting your thoughts continuously, and that starts affecting your behavior, and then your behavior changes in a way that starts affecting your thought and emotions, and so sort of each other start reinforcing the negative emotions reinforce negative thoughts, and negative thoughts reinforce negative behavior, then you go into a vicious cycle. So if you can so to come out of the cycle, the CBT approach tries to uh, change each of these things. So it tries to change the behavior by setting up good routines, or trying to set up good behaviors. Tries to change your thought by teaching you uh, what are the common distortions that can happen in thoughts, and how to identify them, and how to resolve them, and how to address your emotions. So all of that training is given, and there is a well defined methodology for giving CBT. Um, and because it is so structured, we thought that this can also be given through a program. Uh, if something is very subjective and it has to be highly um, configured every time, then it would be difficult. But because CBT is somewhat fairly structured, it can be coded into a program and delivered reasonably. And so we are trying to do it. Some other groups are also trying to do it.
Mm-hmm. So I actually recently read, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that one of the problems or one of the challenges was that about the retention rate. So you guys introduced a bot to help with that for the human interaction. So maybe could you talk about maybe that challenge or some other challenges you could have faced in this project?
Yes, so you're right. The biggest challenge in all these CBT or any automated program is the retention rate. A lot of people start using them out of curiosity, but then very soon they drop out. And so how to engage the users enough so that they can continue the therapy, that is the biggest challenge. And for addressing that, we have tried several measures. So bot is one of them, where instead of simply displaying the content in a passive manner, you just read the content. The interactive bot sort of user can type things and they get a response that is based on the input of the user. So it feels more interactive and more personal, and we are hoping that that will reduce the attrition rate. In addition, we are also adding some games that sort of provide some kind of training in the form of games. Then there is a support group where users can interact with each other and help each other. That might also increase the engagement. So these kind of things we are hoping will address the attrition issue.
So I think it would be somewhat okay to say that it's still in the testing phases. When do you think it would be a part of the mainstream therapy that is given to people?
Right. So because it's a program that is going to be used by people who have already some difficulties. It is very important to ensure that it is not causing any kind of harm, and it's actually helping people in the way that we imagine it would help. And the way of checking whether that's actually happening or not is to do a randomized controlled trial, in which you, in any kind of, like, it's the same kind of paradigm that is used for any new medication. That if you have a new medication, to first you want to check whether it is actually effective or not. So you would give that medication to some people and give some placebo to other people, and then you see at the end of some period whether people who got the medication are better off or not. So similarly, we are about to start a randomized control trial for treadmill, in which some people will get the program and some people will get a control program, and then we will see whether people who got the treadmill program are actually benefited or not. And if that's the case, then we will be releasing it.
We hope that is the case.
So
That's still very hopeful, though. I mean, even if it's a year, maybe even if it's 5 years, it's still going to be really great to have it a part of the normal treatment methods.
So I wanted to talk a little bit more about young people, who I think most of the viewers are young people. Um, how do you think young people, especially those at the end of school or those who are starting college, who are just beginning to think about their career, how do you think they can formally get engaged with research? Like you mentioned, you did some projects in your third year, maybe something along those lines. Can you elaborate?
yes, so I think I mean, there is no one path to research. Uh, I had a certain path, but I mean, if you just look at different researchers here, everyone has had a very different trajectory. Someone started in college, someone started in after college, someone perhaps before college, and in many different ways. So I guess one should try to find whatever opportunity one can get. It's more difficult to find opportunities in the beginning. It becomes easier as you start doing some things and you build some experience. Then based on that, finding the second opportunity is slightly easier, and then based on that, finding the third one is even easier. So finding the first one might be the most difficult one, and in that case, whatever one can find. Uh, so it's often easiest to find something within your college, wherever. If one is already in college, then there may be some people, no matter what college it is, some people, some faculty members who are interested in research. So approaching them and showing them that you are genuinely interested, and taking up a project for a long duration. So I think one mistake that a lot of people do is to jump from project to project too quickly. Like if you do something for a month and then you leave it in between, and then you start doing something else for a month and you leave it in between. That that does not give a lot of confidence that, so the next time you approach someone for a project, they might think that they cannot be sure that you will complete whatever task you take up. Uh, but if you do something for a sufficiently long time and finish it well, then that adds to your credibility, and it will be easier for you or for anyone to find the next project. So that is one recommendation I would give to anyone, that whatever the project it is, do it well, and give it time. I mean, in a college, if you do 2 or 3 projects well, that is better than doing 7 or 8 projects not well.
So while the student is, I'm sorry, but so while a student is approaching this whole research endeavor of theirs, um, what should be going through their mind? Like, should it be more about exploring their interests, or should it be more about like this one problem that they want to, like they're really interested and they want to help solve at least?
Right. So I mean, usually when you are just starting out, it's difficult to have that kind of idea, that this problem that you want to solve. But if someone has that idea, that's great, and then they can find someone who may be interested in that research and then discuss. So that I think is ideal. But even if you don't know what problem you want to work on, and that's probably going to be the case with 95% of people. That's okay. I mean, simply knowing that broadly you are interested in this kind of area, that you are interested in some biological, you want to address something in biology, or or let's say biology and combination of biology and some physics. That even that broad level of interest may be enough, and then one could find a lab that is willing to host you. Once you start working, then you start getting more specific ideas about research questions and further projects.
So, do you have any advice for students who are maybe trying to sort of carve their path into something like a lab or something like an internship? How should they approach the people there? Like, how should they basically maximize their chances of getting that experience?
Um, yeah, I mean, to some extent, it's a sort of, it's like a hit and trial process. It's It depends on which labs one applies to and what availability they have. So one can never know. One would have to apply to lots of places. But I guess to maximize the chances, I guess showing some, I mean, before, like if I were to take a student, I also get a lot of applications from many students, and before deciding whether to take someone or not, I mean, let's say I have positions to take 2 students, and if I have 20 applications, so it's very difficult for me to choose which 2 of the 20 to take. And I would try to see what kind of experience you have before this, what kind of even if you don't have research experience, what kind of coursework you have done and how well you have done in that coursework. And then also based on your how you write to me, I mean, I could one can tell whether it's a generic email if you are copy pasting the same email to lots of people, or have you actually taken time to see what work is being done in my lab, and have you thought about it and written something specific about that. So if you have taken that effort of thinking about my research and written something that is not just a copy paste from the website. Sometimes, I mean, now because this thing has become very common that people expect individualized emails. So many students just copy paste 1 or 2 sentences or the name of a paper from the website and say, I have read this paper and I'm very interested. That also may not be enough because now many people have started doing it. So perhaps, I mean, if one has actually put in some thought and written something in your own words, that will tell me that maybe you are genuinely interested and not.
So, if they have any sort of questions, like if they're approaching you and they have some sort of question about your research itself, will that be like a good sign to you that maybe the student is genuinely curious about what we are doing here?
Yeah, I guess if it's a genuine question, but I would not recommend it as a strategy because if everyone starts doing it, then again it will become. If one is doing it just to show interest and not being genuinely interested, so it could,
Yeah.
then it would be a mess because then there will be like thousands of emails asking questions without being any. But I guess, I mean, thankfully it's not happening too much now. And if someone genuinely writes to me about something, then I'll be happy to reply. And I'm sure every researcher would be happy to answer a genuine question, and that would also show some interest.
So
That's good.
I've been dying to ask this question. Okay. So now that we're in the point of like securing internships and positions at labs, I think Surge is IIT Kanpur's structured summer program for research, right? So do you think having such research programs for high school students could be a possible model in the future? And do you think how can we achieve this, if at all we can?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean it's possible to see, even if you look at Surge. So Surge is the internship program that takes third year students from other colleges
Mhm.
and second year students of the campus itself. Um, so one could argue, why not second year students from other colleges or first year students from other colleges, um, and then why not high school students also? But I guess it's there is a limit on how many people can be hosted by the labs. Even within Surge, we are not able to host all the students who apply. So only some can be selected. Um, so yeah, I think that it's a limitation on how many positions are there in labs and how many people can be taken and actually mentored. Simply taking a lot of people but not being able to give them time or a good project would also not be a good thing. So I'm not sure if it can be made a formal program with lots of students, but I think at this point, given the number of students, high school students who are actually interested in research is still small,
Mhm.
can be managed. It can happen on a case-to-case basis as of now. Um, but if the, I mean, I'm also not averse to it. I think if some small program, maybe with a small batch of high school students, could be started that brings them to campus and gives them some opportunity, that may be a good thing also.
So, hypothetically speaking, maybe in the next few years, IIT does start such a pilot program with maybe just a couple of students from across the country. Do you think premier institutions like IIT would lead this change?
Yeah, I mean, they should, and I mean, given this, the only limitation is the same that I just mentioned, that the
Mhm.
how many students can be hosted, and given the required attention. Um, but certainly, I think a small program can be started, and it should be. I mean, there should be enough people in IIT who are willing to host uh, at least one student per lab, can be
Mhm.
easily managed. So, so IIT should take a lead.
So since we're talking about taking leads, like this question is sort of on the it's sort of broad, but do you think any structural changes can be inculcated in like the secondary education system that might help make research a more popular or an accessible option for most people? I'm assuming here that most people do not enter research for some reason, even if they want to. Do you think any changes could be made to make it more popular?
Yeah, I think the biggest structural change I think that is needed is simply having more good science institutions for undergraduate. Um, uh, ICERs are were a very good move. So maybe about 10, 12 years ago, ICERs were formed. So that allowed a lot of students to go into science education without having to go to IITs or NITs. Um, and I think thousands of kids are now going to ISRs and getting good science education there. But that number is still very small. I mean, the overall number of seats in ISRs compared to the number of students in the country is very small. Um, so that I think that is going to be the most effective step. If the government wants to do something substantial, then it should take form more good quality colleges and give them proper resources.
So, from the perspective of someone working in the government, like what sort of incentive would you say they have for making more research institutions, or why should research be funded more in a sense?
I think that's a very the answer to that is quite obvious. I think. I mean, everyone now realizes that the future of the country depends on the scientific output and the scientific skills of of the population. I mean, more and more jobs are becoming automated, and the economy is changing from the more hardware or more agricultural jobs to more technical jobs. So countries that have more number of students in science and research are going to do better in the future than countries that remain limited to the traditional kind of education. And I think
Yeah.
almost everyone realizes this. It's just a matter of acting on it and having the resources to act on it. It takes a lot of resources to form a new college. Um, but given the amount of resources the government spends on various things, I think some of those resources can be redirected. More of those resources can be redirected to education.
So what can people who are in the scientific fields, what can they do to try to make this change happen?
Well, as scientists, I would be one of them. And so, what could people like us do to convince the government to start more colleges? Um, yeah, I'm not sure if I think the biggest push can come from the general uh, population. If kids and then their parents start asking for it, if it becomes like one of the issues on which people can even vote, I mean, then that will be the thing that will, I mean, politicians care about vote ultimately. So if the more the number of people who ask for it, the more pressure they would have to start something like that.
That's a plan. Yeah.
How to take it to larger number of people is something I don't know.
Mhm. I think that's a very broad question, first off. And second, like combining science and politics is a whole different domain. So, um, but we're almost at the end of our interview. So, lastly, do you have any advice for young researchers just getting started? What could they keep in mind? I think we already briefly touched this, but maybe you could just wrap up everything.
Yeah, so I mean to summarize some of the recommendations, keep the curiosity going about various things. Um, I guess any field can be interesting. So and there are lots of unknowns in any field. So maintain the curiosity about different things and develop your good skill set. The basic skills of physics, chemistry, basic biology, and math are going to be useful no matter what kind of research area one goes into eventually. So uh, maintain those basic skills and then just go ahead with whatever opportunity one can get. So don't try to judge too much whether this is the right entry point for me in research or that would be the right entry point. Whatever entry point one gets, go with it and do your best in that, and don't try to jump out of it very quickly. Whatever project you have taken, do a good job so that you can show the output of that, and then you can find a better position the next time.
That's perfect. I think that's a pretty good takeaway as well. Professor Gupta, thank you so much for joining us today, and thanks to our audience for tuning in. We hope to see everyone in the future episodes.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I really
yeah.
enjoyed doing this.